Hey, it's 6 o'clock p.m., April 17th, 2023. Do you know where your children are? You're listening to Mondays with Mondaine, and I'm E.D. Mondaine. Will darkness be the death of democracy in America? We're living in gloomy times, but tonight's guest will remind us of times that were much brighter, but not much better. Paul Block, a New Yorker from 1969 until he moved. 45 years he spent in the entertainment industry as a segment producer and a talent coordinator, working for Johnny Carson for over 6 years, eventually becoming a producer. He came to Portland from Los Angeles in 2007. He's worked with such greats as Aretha Franklin, Dave Chappelle, Ray Charles, you name it. He's worked with them. And he's here to talk to us about some of those stories tonight. One of his greatest accomplishments is working with this woman called Gila Lane. I think he married her. And they have two beautiful daughters. One is Kiva, who has a spa and a coffee and tea spot here in Northwest Portland. I am so happy to have him with us tonight to talk about his experiences. And now, he's really an example of how we've bridged music in the black community and black talent with America, and how we've plugged it in and made this place a shining state of being for the times that were then to the places where we want to get to now. Hey, Paul, it's good to have you with us.
It's a pleasure to be here. And just to say one more thing, my second daughter is Shauna.
Shauna.
And my second daughter spent 7 years on Who's the Boss, that TV series, where she played Bonnie, Alyssa Milano's best friend.
Wow.
And
I remember Bonnie.
Yeah. And Kiva, my older daughter, is here in Portland. She has a spa and a tea house in Northwest Portland at 24th and Raleigh, and you should all go there because you'll feel better than you ever felt.
You know, it's important to know that you're not just a father, but you're a grandfather.
Of four Gen Z grandchildren.
And Paul is 82 years old. Can you believe that? Or
please don't remind me.
Don't remind.
On one hand. On the other hand, considering the alternative, it's great.
You know, when I look at you and Gila together, Gila is a photographer, and she ran an art gallery that she's very sad about it closing right now. But when I look at you two together, you look like kids. You look like teenagers. And
well, I'm glad, and I often act like one, and that gets her pissed off at me, but that's fine. Yes, we look like teenagers sometimes.
You know, I am always so impressed when you talk to me about the work that you've done with so many of the people that I love so well. People like Aretha Franklin and Ray Charles and Dave Chappelle and Tommy Davidson and
and a lot of white folks, too.
Well, I don't want to talk about the white folks. I just want to talk about the black brothers.
Those people that you're talking about, I love them all. I spent a day and a half in a studio with Ray Charles preparing for his appearance on The Tonight Show. We became friends, and I think I told you the story of when he finally did The Tonight Show. We did a rehearsal at The Tonight Show, and I had a music guest. I had to be there at 2:30, where the guest would rehearse with Doc Severinsen and the band, and it was greatest times, that rehearsal time. And Ray finishes his rehearsal of his first song, and I figured, I've spent a day with him, we can be real cordial with each other. And I leaned over and I said, whispered in his ear so no one else would hear it. I said, Ray, I'm not so sure that's the right song for this show. And he took a beat. I'd say looked up, but he was blind, turned around and said to me, you let me worry about the music, boy. And he did that song, and it was a knockout, and he was right, and I was stupid. And I'm so sorry he died, but I'm so glad he did what he did.
Well, talking about how you work with the whites and the blacks in the industry, what was the climate like for black people versus white people, or white entertainers versus black entertainers? And was it something that was was felt in the atmosphere of that time?
Yeah, most of the black people that were on TV when I started were performers. They weren't actors, they weren't personalities, they were singers and dancers and that kind of stuff. As time went on, they became personalities. People like Norman Lear developed series for Jimmy Walker and for Sherman Hemsley.
Yeah.
And those and they developed over my period of time there from being song and dance and funny people into becoming personalities and actors and true stars in America. I'm not saying that I loved Richie Pryor, who I worked with, and I'm not saying he wasn't a true star, but if he wasn't a very, very successful stand-up comedian in his own right, I'm not so sure he would have been put on TV as a personality.
What's the difference between a personality and a talent?
Well, I don't know. A personality can have talent.
Yeah.
Talent can be a personality, but I'm talking about specific performing talent, like stand-up comedy or music or dance, versus sitting down in a chair and having a conversation and being amusing and making the world want to see more of you as a conversationalist. One of my favorite people on The Tonight Show was white, conversationalist, and his name was Orson Bean. And I loved Orson, and I had him on the show every 6 or 7 weeks. But he didn't do comedy. He came out, he sat, he told stories, he told jokes, some of which I won't repeat now, but some of them which I remember them and tell them to people because he was so good at telling stories and telling jokes. But that, when I first started in TV, there were very few. Red Fox, he was always acceptable. That's because he had already become a performing star. But when he did The Tonight Show, I don't remember. I think he had to do stand-up before he sat down.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's no difference between talent and personality. Some talent doesn't have personality. I mean, some personality can't sing and dance.
Yeah. So what you're telling me and what I'm hearing is the talent gives us the bridge to becoming the personality. When we become accustomed to the talent and we become enamored by the talent, it becomes a personality and it gives us a voice to speak.
I guess. That's very esoteric. By the way, getting back to your introduction of the old days versus these days, the old days weren't all that good.
Yeah.
I remember even before I started working in television, there was a TV show called the Chrysler Theater. I think it was called something like that. It was an hour of TV every week, sponsored by Chrysler, and had a different host, and it was a variety show. There was very, very few mixed black and white things on television in those days. But Chrysler was very risky, and they decided to put on a show hosted by Harry Belafonte and Petula Clark. And that was a little bit of a risk starting, but then the show started, and I think it was before tape, so it was live, and I think they had to live with it. Belafonte walked out holding Petula's hand, and she was holding his hand.
Yeah.
A week or two later, they got canceled because that was verboten on television at the time.
I think that I heard something about that.
So the good old days left a lot to be desired. They were simple. They were easier for some of us to deal with. People could rise to the top quicker. Somebody talked to me about comedy these days. Comedians have become an industry.
Yeah.
It's not like there's a few that are really funny that get to your TV screen or your nightclub, but there's thousands of them now. You turn around, there's somebody's being a comedian.
Yeah.
And I sort of left the entertainment industry in the early 2000s when I became an executive producer in other stuff. I went to work for a company in San Francisco owned by Paul Allen called Tech TV. And I didn't use a lot of entertainment at that point. I was doing several shows for the network and a lot of specials. but I left the entertainment industry, so I'm not that conversant with comedians and those kind of people after around 2005, 2006.
We talked about those times being brighter, but not better. They were brighter times because the way we revered entertainers was a little bit different than we do now. I don't, I'm 64, and I tell you what,
Didn't the Beatles write a song about you?
the Beatles wrote a song about me.
Yeah,
What was it called, Paul?
I think it was When I Was 62 or something like that.
You, you know, I don't even know who some of these like you mentioned, they come up so fast and it's so
Or
so
they
so
don't, or
varied.
they're out there, and this one's opening at a comedy club, and this one's hosting at a comedy club, and this one's the middle act. And you never get to know who they are because they're part of a comedian's industry rather than those that have floated to our vision.
What do you think that made it brighter? What made it brighter? What was it about the industry at that time that made it brighter?
I wish I could answer that question. I'm just a schmuck living in fucking Portland, trying to understand what life is all about, raising my children and my grandchildren. What made it brighter? I think that I think stars were in the industry. Stars were bigger than they are now. I think that it's flattened out. It's more pancaked now. There were 3 networks back then. Now there's, I don't know, 500 platforms. Every time I turn on my television, they're wanting me to buy MGM Plus or Hulu Plus or Paramount Plus. Used to be NBC, ABC, CBS. And it was big news when Fox came on. By the way, Fox wasn't always Fox News. Fox came on as a TV network that was trying to make it as a 4th network. It was when what I considered to be evil man named Roger Ailes got involved with Fox and said, let's develop a news talk channel that's aimed at the conservatives of the country. I think that's when Fox News turned.
So I think in a sense that's you're speaking of a time that really created the dullness and the gloom when television changed, when it got into the evil personalities, as you call them, in the Fox kind of series. When you talk about the political kind of exchange that would happen with Fox, tell us what you mean.
On the other hand,
okay.
On the other hand, you're looking at television now, and there are mixed families, there are mixed marriages, there are mixed couples doing commercials. I'd say every 3rd or 4th commercial is interracial, whether it's black, white, Chinese, Asian, whatever. So in that respect, television has become much more diverse and much more a platform of the entire people. In those days, it was a platform of the 3 people who ran the 3 networks. Now they've understood that, I don't know the exact number, what is America's what, 12, 13% black, 14% black? That's a market. You want to sell to those people, you can't put on Lawrence Welk and think that you're going to find a bunch of people in the hood that give a damn about what Lawrence Welk is tapping his foot and seeking champagne bubbles or whatever it is. It's flattened out. It's become more of a people's medium. And I like it for that. What it doesn't do so much anymore is create those golden stars. You know, the Cary Grants, the Audrey Hepburns, the David Nivens. You know, I put David Niven on the Tonight Show as a big star back then. You ask every Gen Z in the United States who is David Niven today, they have no idea.
Well, no.
He was part of the golden age of Hollywood. We're out of that, but we're into a mass age of media that I believe is more diverse, more informative, more educational, and though I'm complaining about comedy being an industry, more relevant with its comedy. Everything about it today is better. I mean, the way they record it. When I started, a camera was a small statue. You know, it was big. It was maybe 6 or 7 feet high.
Yeah.
I had a guy behind it who spread his arms out between things to try to work it. They had other people pushing it. That alone, I mean, kept it down to those people that could afford to do it. Today, you can record it on a telephone.
Yeah.
The people at Apple will be happy to hear me say you can record on Apple phone better than you could have recorded on an RCA 800-pound camera back in those days.
The Apple 14.
Apple 14. I confess I haven't gone that far yet. I have an Apple 11.
Well, you know what? You talked about specials. You produce shows for HBO.
Yes.
You produce shows for Showtime.
Yes.
Those platforms, are they still? I mean, do you think that those that we should still do more of that expression in terms of, what specials have you heard of now that would kind of take us to the specials that you did?
The
in
last
those
one,
times?
well, the last one that made real big news was a few weeks ago because everybody was waiting to see what Chris Rock was going to say about getting hit by Will Smith. By the way, I think Chris Rock is one of the most inventive, creative, better comedians of our generation.
I would agree.
I think he's great. And I wish that I was producing specials when Chris had started because he's a guy I'd love to have worked with. Those days, when I was doing specials, if you were a real good comic, you came real close to almost every one of them, the real good ones, getting a TV special. And it was special. Now you get a guy for a half an hour, it's not so special anymore. I remember the great specials, by the way, and I'm not saying this because I'm in a black place, but the great specials that I remember are when Eddie Murphy got in front of a camera and knocked me out, or when Richie Pryor on Sunset Boulevard got in front of, I don't mean camera, I mean a curtain.
Yeah.
No set, just a curtain. Richie Pryor, same thing, no set, just a curtain. But my God, you could tell from the beginning that Richard Pryor was going to change comedy, and he did.
Yeah, well, they called him the king of comedy.
And I worked with Richard half a dozen times, maybe more. When I was a talent agent in New York, where I started, our agency represented Richard. And one of our agents, we had agents and assistants. And one of the assistants, from the time Richie was booked on the Ed Sullivan Show and came to New York, one of our assistants was assigned to be with Richie 24 hours a day until he did the Ed Sullivan Show and it was all over. Because you never knew where Richie was going to go.
They say that television helped mold our nation.
Absolutely.
And it helped change the whole course of where our world is heading.
Let me introduce the name Norman Lear.
I was going to talk about it.
Then I should keep my mouth shut. It's your show. Talk about
No,
Norman.
I want to talk about Norman Lear because he really brought exotic change to the industry.
All in the family.
Wow.
It started in England as a show called Till Death Us Do Part. And Norman got the rights and brought it to America, did 4 pilots before he got it right, but got it right with that quartet of stars.
Yeah, I remember.
And boy, did he knock the hell out of bigotry and knock the hell out of prejudice, knock the hell out of everything. I mean, he made cracker look like a cracker. He made a redneck look like a redneck. And he made the young people show the way. Rob Reiner and Sally Struthers, Rob more than Sally, were showing the way to Archie Bunker and Edith Bunker. Well, she was on another planet, but Archie.
And then there's Maude.
Okay, Maude was beyond there. And I think Edie was setting me up. When I came to California from New York, I did some talent coordinating because I couldn't really find much work, and I had a deal with an Eastern show called the Mike Douglas Show, where I was the West Coast talent coordinator.
Mike Douglas was probably the biggest name before Johnny Carson.
I must say that one of the best shows I ever booked in my life was for Mike Douglas. We did it on an aircraft carrier in San Diego, and on the same show was Johnny Cash, Linda Ronstadt, and Chuck Berry. And I felt like I died and went to heaven.
Wow.
I mean, that was my music. I loved all of those people. I used to watch Chuck Berry at the New York and Brooklyn Paramount Theater at Alan Freed's rock and roll shows. And Chuck Berry knocked me out. I said, that's where music is going, and that's where it went. Anyway, I forget what I was talking about. When I first moved to California, I had a deal with Mike Douglas.
Okay.
And that kept me alive a little bit, but just a little bit. It wasn't a full salary thing. And a friend of mine, Jim McCauley, came west and brought me into his deal working for the United Methodist Church. They had an organization called the Population Institute.
Yes.
And their job was to try to convince the world that you should have 2.1 children, that 8 children in a family is bad for the planet because it can't sustain that many people. And so they had this organization, and they hired Jim, and Jim brought me into it, and our job was to get television to not show how wonderful it was to have 6 or 8 or 10 children in a family. Our job was to get the programmers to understand that you got to have 2 children in a family, or you're going to screw up the planet. You're not just going to screw up the planet, you're going to screw up the livability of people on the planet. And we did real well. I did that for 1.5 years. And the biggest success I had in that was in the TV series Maude. Maude was played by B. Arthur, very successful.
Yes.
And Norman Lear worked this out for us. We got Maude to have an abortion. And before that, abortion was an ugly, dirty word in America. Maude had an abortion, and all of a sudden, everybody's opened their eyes. Geez, if Maude can have an abortion, maybe it ain't so bad.
You know, we're back at that place
Worse.
again.
Worse.
You know, we had accepted, embraced the idea that women had control of their bodies.
Yes.
And it was their choice. Now we're looking at making abortion taboo all over again.
The argument against having an abortion with some people is a righteous one, saying, well, sperm meets an egg, we now have a human being inside you.
Yeah.
And the people who don't want to have a human being inside them, well, it's not quite a human being. It's a zygote. It's a fetus. It hasn't. If you're religious and you really believe in the Bible says you become a living human being when you take your first breath.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's personally somewhere in the middle.
I would agree.
And but I think that there was a book. I think I turned you on to it. I'm not sure. A book called Freakonomics.
Yeah.
And one of the chapters.
Good book.
Yeah, it is. One of the I forget who wrote it. Bill somebody. It's a good book.
We weren't ready to talk about that, but it's a good book.
I'm sorry. One of the chapters in it talked about how crime took a big dive at the beginning of the 20th century. In the 1990s, crime in America took a big dive.
Yes.
And these guys statistically put it to 18 years after Roe versus Wade made abortion legal. They were saying that children, after abortion was legal, the children that were going to be born into a family that did not want them were not going to be born anymore. And this was going to reduce those people who were into hurting society.
Yeah.
And I know we weren't going to talk about that, and I don't want to get that into abortion.
Well, that's okay.
But Maud did have an abortion, and I was greatly responsible for that.
Wow. You heard it. This was the doctor of abortion back then. Anyway, what you're looking at is Mondays with Mondaine, and I'm so glad to have you. Take the time right now to just hit the like button and subscribe, and write some comments down there in the comments box, and we want to talk about what you want us to talk about. We're here with Paul Block, producer extraordinaire, talent coordinator, good grandfather, wonderful father. Hey, Paul, we've talked about how TV kind of molded the heart and face of America then. How do you think that we're failing, or what is the report card looking like today?
Ratings. And if you look at the ratings, those stations and networks that are combative seem to get the highest ratings with combat. So the easiest way to do that in America is put right against left. And you can argue all day. You can have fights, and you can say, yeah, my side won, or yeah, my side won. And I think that's the worst development of television. I think it's hurting the country, because I think life is following art, and the media is setting up polarization, and I think that is terrible. And it's not necessarily in a music show or in a non-political comedy show, but once you get into politics, man, and it's right against left, you're setting up sides and you're setting up adversaries, and that gives ratings because people are passionate about their fights and their arguments and their politics, but it ain't helping our country.
No, I don't think it's helping our country at all. You know, you talked about Norman Lear bringing a change to the climate of the interaction between whites and blacks and Jews and Gentiles, as it were. And I know that we see the diversity of the mixed American families on television now. What message, in your mind, do you think we ought to be sending, since the atmosphere has changed and since this is more of accepted? How should we be using this as a tool to shape America and knock it into the shape that we ought to see?
My opinion, and I'm just a retired producer of comedy and music, is that we have to be teaching compromise. We have to be teaching, we got to meet in the middle. I mean, how do you teach compromise, though, when somebody says you got no right to live, period? I mean, can I have a little right to live?
Everybody's got a right to live.
I know that, but that's not, in some extent, that's not compromise.
Yes.
But compromise is what we have to learn, and we have to teach, and that's the way it always. Okay, I'm not saying that this country was right. I mean, we had a lot of bad crap happening. But when you had the head Republican and the head Democrat wanting different things, they'd get together, they'd have a few drinks, and they'd meet somewhere in the middle. Mm-hmm. That somewhere in the middle, by the way, was always painful to the black Americans.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that modern America has started to realize.
Mm-hmm. Black people are the last informed and the first harmed.
And a 12 or 15% dollar market. So
Yes.
if you want to reach that market, you have to address that market.
Amen, brother.
And I think people are, the media is starting to realize that, but we still have our South and North, and you know what? I'm saying South and North. I grew up in Queens, New York. And I got to tell you, I don't think the people in Alabama were any more bigoted than the white people in the neighborhood in Queens where I grew up.
Say that.
And I was Jewish then, and even the Jews. Eventually, the Jews got together and started saying, "No, this is wrong." But back then, even the Jews were white. I think they were trying to score with their white Christian friends or something. And there was the lower middle class where I lived in Queens. These were bigoted times. These are bigoted times. There were fights. I grew up around the corner from and this was Jewish Christian. I grew up around the corner from a Catholic church, and every Saturday they had catechism classes, and the kids that went to catechism classes would come out having been taught for 2 hours that the Jews killed Jesus, and they'd come out looking for action. So it went that way too. I think the church has a lot to do with it. A lot of people are believers.
Yes.
And what the church says makes a lot of influence over a lot of people. Anyway, what I'm saying is that Queens was just as bad as Alabama. They didn't lynch people, but boy, they weren't nice.
You know, there is a dark climate in America, and I think that when we talk about leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King, who told us prior to his death that there was going to be a different climate in our country that we're seeing right now, where it was no longer going to be just about civil rights, but it was going to be about human rights. And we're looking at a new poor man in America. He's no longer the indigent, illiterate, or the African American. He is the white blue collar worker that's a half paycheck away from homelessness. Bridging that gap here in America is what's happening now. And it's TV and places like that that we see the great differences. If you were to produce a show today, Paul, if you were to direct the ultimate show and bring in the right kind of talents to tell the story, how would you do that? What would the story be called? And who would you bring in right now?
I don't know who I'd be bringing in. I'd be doing casting, but it would be a 2023 version of All in the Family.
Wow. Tell us more about that.
Well, you've got bigoted hate on one side, though it's sort of lovable to some extent. I mean, Archie Bunker, you didn't hate him totally because he was a bigot. But you also had Rob Reiner on the other side saying, stop it, you're a bigot. You're yesterday's news, I'm today's news. And today, I might even make it a mixed family if I could find a way to put comedy into it. I think it has to be funny. I think it has to be comedy because I think that's the way you get people to listen. So I'm not saying this Archie Bunker and Edith Bunker and Meathead. I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
I'm saying today's version of it. It was like when Michael J. Fox was playing the Republican in The Family of Democrats.
Yeah.
By the way, I just totally wish him the best. He's such a nice person who I got to know very well, and who probably would have been among the royalty of American stardom had he not gotten sick.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that you got to hit it with comedy, and you got to put it all on the same stage at the same time. I think 90% of the show takes place in one house, and there's people on one side, people on the other side, one generation, another generation, maybe one color, maybe mixed color. I'd be casting, and I'd be looking for I'm not a writer, by the way, I'm a producer. I'd be looking for the best writers in the country to help me put it together.
Wow. You know, it's been such a joy and a privilege to have history sitting next to me.
Oh,
Paul,
come on.
You have made history in America, and you've helped bring us to our knees in terms of understanding just by your contributions. He mentioned the household and what it's going to take in the living room. Our conversations that we have in the houses that we live in, the things that we do every day, the people that we interact with, we've got to have to come back to that brighter time, but not better time, in order to make it better. You know, Betty bought some butter, but the butter Betty bought was bitter, so Betty bought some better butter to make the bitter butter better. I don't know, but we're going to have to take that mixture of cultures and bring it to the relevance of today. Listen, you've been listening to E.D. Mondaine on Mondays with Mondaine, and our guest tonight has been Mr. Paul Block. Paul, we're so glad to have you.
I am happy to be had.
Oh, he's happy to be had. Now, you heard that right here. So if you could just call 586. No. When I'm not interviewing people and I'm on a good day, I'm a pastor here at Celebration Tabernacle. Celebration Tabernacle is at 8131 North Denver Avenue, right here in Portland, Oregon. By the way, Paul, right next door is a fabulous restaurant called Poshine's.
I have eaten there. They have the best brisket in Portland.
That's what he says.
And I took my one of my granddaughters there, and she fell in love with your catfish.
Wow. You had it. We're not catfishing you tonight, but we want you to hit the like button. We want you to subscribe. We want you to share. We want you to turn on your notifications. And more than that, I want to thank you for watching. I'm so privileged to have the best staff in the world. Hey! And I just love you. I love you with all my heart. Until next time, have a nice day.